Hello, and welcome to Talk Relationship to Me, the show that explores some of the most important relationship topics. I'm Dr. Elana Hoffman. As a clinical psychologist, I focus on all things relationships. From dating to sex to long-term relationships to divorce, I cover it all. I use my professional lens as well as my lived experience to cover these topics. Do you need to talk relationships? You're in the right place. On today's episode, I am covering why physical touch it doesn't always, but it can wane in long-term relationships. So, I see a lot of individuals and couples, and many of them tell me that, there's not a lot of physical touch in their relationship. Yes, sex falls under the category of physical touch, but I really, in this episode, am talking about non-sexual physical touch. So hand-holding, cuddling, hugging, kissing, although not making out like it's foreplay, but just kissing, caressing, massages, laying together, things like that. So there are a lot of clients I have who really are saddened by the fact that they don't get a lot of physical touch. And lots of them have a love language of physical touch. A lot of men in particular have a love language of physical touch. And again, this does not necessarily mean sex, but it means that a lot of people feel and receive love when they receive touch. And, this is really similar to babies and small children and animals, who love to receive pets and touch and snuggles and kisses and all of these things. So a lot of people that I talk to are in this sort of situation where it doesn't really happen and they would really like it to. So here are some of the reasons that I see in my practice of why this can wane in long-term relationships. So one reason is, a sort of a difference in how people feel about physical touch. So maybe it's love language. Maybe it is just some people just are touchy people and some people are not touchy people. So, if you are mismatched on that, this is going to be a problem in your relationship. And sometimes this is not talked about early on. And sometimes in the beginning, in new relationship energy, you are touching a lot, but then people tend to return to kind of a baseline of the kind of touch that they are comfortable with. So, if you are somebody who loves to hold hands down the street in public and you are paired with someone who does not love to hold hands down the street in public, then that is, of course, going to be a difference in how you like to touch and be close to your partner. Some people really feel connected that way by being touched and by touching, and some people really don't. So it could just be a mismatch in that from the beginning. And of course, as I've discussed before, if you don't kind of talk about how you receive love and what makes you feel good and connected, and this is one of those ways, then over time, it's you're not going to be able to do that for your partner if you don't even know that this is something that they want to feel close and connected. So, that's one reason, just general mismatch. Another one is, of course, over time, if things are not going great in the relationship and there is resentment built up, then you are not going to want to have a lot of physical closeness and a lot of physical touch. And again, I see a lot of this in women who come in who, maybe are partnered or married to men whose love language is physical touch, but they don't feel close and connected to their husbands, so they don't want to touch them. And so, that is a big reason, resentment, fighting, things like that. And if men are, you know, um, sort of not asking them about their day and not being interested in the things that they're saying. I talked about this in my recent episode about mistakes that men make initiating sex. And this is very related to it. I'm not really talking about initiating sex here, but I'm talking about just general physical touch. And women are going to not want to do that, especially if it's not their love language, if they're feeling really disconnected from their husbands, meaning, their husbands have not shown interest in them, have not helped them out, have not treated them very well. They're, of course, not going to want to touch them. They're, of course, not going to want to have sex with them. That's, part of it that is, a related thing, of course, but even holding hands, cuddling, touching, being physically close, sitting, touching on the couch while watching TV, things like that. If they're not really feeling connected, they're not going to want to do that. So that is another reason. Another one is oftentimes physical touch gets associated with sex, and it can be an indicator of, initiation when men in particular reach out to their wives to touch them, and this touch over time has become associated with sex. And sometimes the only time that they touch is when they want sex, and women are not in the mood for sex at that time for various reasons. Again, please refer to my podcast before about mistakes men make initiating, and also about responsive desire. That's important too. But if physical touch is associated with sex, meaning, you know, that it is not for her, it is not for relaxation, it is not a relaxing physical sensation, it is just sort of a signal of you wanting something from your wife, she is going to not want to touch you over time, because she's going to be afraid that if she leans in for the hug or the kiss, you're going to want to kind of take it further, and you're not going to be, sort of satisfied with that. So I hear a lot of women who say that, well, I'd like to hug my husband. I'd like to get a massage from my husband, but every time it turns into sex, or he tries to turn it into sex, and I don't want that. I'm not in that space. So this is a big reason. It would kind of be like if every time your wife went to go to the kitchen to get a snack, you would ask her, "Hey, what are you making? Are you making this meal? Are you making this big meal?" Then she would, over time, like, she wouldn't go in the kitchen, right? She would not go to even get a snack if every time you asked her, "Hey, what are you making? Are you going to make a meal?" So that is a big piece of it, the association of it. And another one is, you know, oftentimes, if that is the case, a woman will sort of bristle away, right? If they don't want to be touched and they think it's a move to have sex and they don't want that, then they might bristle away, like lean away. And of course, nobody wants that reaction from their partner. So if that is happening, then over time, the initiator is going to stop even just reaching out to touch. If every time you get a bristle response, you're not going to want to touch your partner anymore, because you're going to feel rejected and alone and sad. And a lot of people that I see as clients are in that pattern, or in that situation where they feel like they can't even reach out to touch their wives in a non-sexual way, because they'll lean away and they'll think they're just associating, they'll think they're just wanting sex when really they just want to be close with them, and that is how they are close and connected. And so this over time leads to a lot of disconnection. Another reason is that women are, often really touched out. This is a term that we hear, and it is true. Although the caveat to it, if there's small kids, or if there's, a lot of, uh, you know, um, y- yeah, small kids, or kids at really any age, who are sort of, on her, and she is quote unquote touched out. This is a thing, especially if she's a sensitive person, if she's sensitive to different sensations, particularly sensitive, then being touched out is definitely a thing. However, sh- people are only touched out when, again, they feel like that touch is associated with an ask. So, for example, if you are married to somebody who loves to go get professional massages, they're not touched out. They're just not wanting it to come with expectations, because, of course, a professional massage is just for them. Right? And they can tell them, what they like. They can tell them the pressure that they like, and it is just for them, for their relaxation. So, if your wife does that, then that means that it's not the actual touch, it is what is associated with it. And massage is a big thing that I talk to my clients about. It's really underutilized technique for connection, but often it is because it has become associated with sex. So, if you are listening to this and you really want to increase the non-sexual physical touch in your relationship, I really encourage you to use massage as a way to do that, and to really say, and to even say, explicitly, "Hey, I know that this has in the past been associated with sex. This is not the deal here. I just want to touch you and be close to you. And I want to give you more massages. And, this is like for you, to your wife. And then, again, refer back to responsive desire. If you make her feel relaxed and, maybe she has some body aches and you help with a massage, you help with her pain, then she will feel much more close and connected to you and will be willing to, get in the mindset of responsive desire maybe the next morning or the next day, a few days later, and it will kind of then she'll want to have sex, but it's not like give massage, next thing have sex. So, um, so that's one thing. That's another reason. And so I really encourage, a lot of clients that I see to really increase the non-sexual physical touch. And if it has been like this for a long time, it can't really come out of nowhere. You can't all of a sudden, without having a conversation, start, increasing this non-sexual physical touch. Some couples I see, have sat on opposite ends of the couch in the evening for years and have not touched. So you can't just all of a sudden, you know, sit close to your wife on the couch and not say anything about it. A conversation is really important about like, hey, I've really been missing being physically close to you. I understand that we might feel disconnected in a lot of ways, or I understand that touch is associated with sex for you. And that's not something that, you know, you want to have that association for, but I really want to work on our connection. This is how I receive love. And so, I'd love to try to talk to touch more. And of course, this can lead to a conversation about how she receives love. And, hopefully you can have an open conversation about this. Another reason is also, I mentioned this in my initiation podcast, is also bad hygiene. If you're not taking care of yourself, then she's not going to want to be close to you. Another reason is, you know, um, timing of it. If she again is in the middle of something and you just are, wanting to touch her, then that's not gonna go over well. Maybe she's using her hands and her hands are busy and you're trying to hold her hand while she's doing something. So, help her do the thing and touch later. Another thing is also attachment styles play into this. And I will do more podcasts on attachment styles specifically because it's a good base of knowledge to have. But a lot of avoidant attached people really don't like to be close, in any way, really don't like to really be all that vulnerable. And physical touch is a way to be that they feel very vulnerable. And so they don't really like that very much. Meanwhile, if you're paired with someone who is a pursuer and really loves physical touch, then that could be at play there too. If this has been going on a long time, and you are in a dynamic of a roommate situation where it's not sexual or really physical in any way, then, that is a not romantic dynamic, right? You're in a roommate dynamic. And so you are not touching each other. And lots of things lead to that. Those are many other subtopics in and of themselves, but this is another reason, just in the context of this topic, why non-sexual physical touch might not be present in your relationship. Another reason why non-sexual physical touch can wane in long-term relationships, and this is a difficult reason, but is one that I see. It's sort of an elephant in the room situation, is just when you are not really all that attracted to your partner. And this happens more often than people would like to admit. And of course, this is a bad situation for many reasons. This obviously does not just affect non-sexual physical touch. It obviously affects sex and lots of other things. But, in the context of this topic, this could be a reason. Often it turns out that, when you go back, that the whoever I'm talking to, the client that I'm talking to was never attracted to their partner. They weren't their physical type. They were not all that attracted. They were with them for other reasons. And this is also, different topics here. But the bottom line is, if you were never attracted to your partner, then of course you are not going to want really to touch them non-sexually or sexually. And so this is also why I tell my clients who are dating, we talk a lot about attraction in the beginning, because attraction inevitably declines over time in long-term monogamous relationships, because this is just how we are wired. We are wired to be drawn to new partners. It doesn't mean that you cannot be and stay physically attracted to a partner over time, but it has to start out really high because it inevitably, for the most part, of course, there are exceptions, declines over time. And, I hear this more often from women than from men. Oftentimes, I will hear men say that they actually are more attracted to their partner over time, and that could be a difference too. But women are, often it declines. So it's important to start off really high in terms of attraction when you are dating. You got to be super attracted to your partner because, again, for many reasons, it inevitably declines. People don't like that, but it's true. And so, pick someone who you really like to touch in the beginning. But this is, of course, a major reason that can get in the way of non-sexual physical touch. You also might not actually like the way your partner touches. You might not like their style of handholding. You might not like how they put their arm around you. You might not like the pressure that they give you when they give you a hug. They might be like kind of awkward at hugging. You might not actually like the way that they touch, which, hopefully is something that is maybe addressed early on, because if you are with someone for a long time and then all of a sudden you tell them, "Hey, I don't like the way you hold my hand," or "Hey, I don't like the way you massage me," then this can be it can be difficult to say. So try not to get in that situation in the first place. Maybe that's not helpful at this moment for some of you that are listening, but it reminds me of my faking orgasms episode that I did a little while ago, where it was like, if you do it at the beginning, then it's really hard to get out of the pattern of it. So just, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible. So if you are in the situation and, some of this is resonating, then there are ways that, there are people that can help you have these tough conversations. So that is another reason why physical touch can wane. And also people just don't talk about it, right? Again, they don't really talk about, "Hey, I miss this. This is the way to connect. How do you like to be touched?" So this is, a conversation again to be had sort of early on, and to take temperatures about during the relationship, because things change over time. Things change week to week, day to day, you know, people don't feel like being touched. Women's cycles affect what time of the month they like to be touched, how their fatigue level, their sex drive, their mood. I mean, all these things. I'm definitely going to do an episode on just that, how important it is to like monitor your own cycle and monitor your partner's cycle if you are with a woman who has a cycle, because it tells you all kinds of information. And one of those is, there's a time in the cycle that women are much more amenable to physical touch and intimacy. This is like early on in the cycle, after their period. In the follicular phase, this is like a particularly good time for physical closeness and affection. So, more on that another time. But that is also a big reason, or maybe they're not feeling well, maybe they're hurt, they're in pain or they're sick. Of course, these are, circumstantial reasons why touch, it might not be happening in your relationship at a particular time. But if this happens all the time, then there might be bigger underlying reasons why. Another thing, and this of course affects sex too, is, if there is a parent child dynamic in the relationship. And this is also a whole other topic, but that could be very detrimental to a dynamic where there's an equal partnership, where it's not a parent child dynamic, is not a sexy dynamic, and therefore can also affect physical touch in the relationship. So, lots of reasons why over time non-sexual physical touch can wane. But I encourage you, if you're sort of in this, if you're not at a point where this hasn't happened in years and this never happens, then I really encourage you to have a conversation about it with your partner if it's something that you're wanting to work on and increase, and say something, like I said before, along the lines of how you want to have more non-sexual physical touch. It makes you feel close and connected. What are other things you can do for your partner to make them feel close and connected? Because a lot of people really love non-sexual physical touch, and it's not happening, and those people are, feel very lonely in their relationships and sad. And sometimes the conversation can fix it, and sometimes it's been such a long time, or there's lots of resentment and you're in a bad place, and more professional help might be warranted at that time. But hopefully this was helpful in terms of why physical touch can and often wanes in long-term relationships, and don't discount the importance of it. Physical touch gives you all kinds of great hormones, dopamine, oxytocin. You feel close and connected that way. And, it's something that is really important in relationships. So it's don't dismiss it as an important thing to work on if it's not there. Okay. This has been Talk Relationship to Me. I'm Dr. Elana Hoffman. This podcast is produced by Peach Island Productions. If you have questions about relationships, I'd love to hear from you. You can go to my website, drelanahoffman.com, and click contact, or find me on Instagram at dr.elanahoffman. And you can find all the info you need and more about today's episode in the show notes. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode, I would love to hear from you. You could inspire a podcast topic. And until next time, just remember that, physical touch is important and should not be discounted. Okay, thanks for listening.